Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Hi, Kevin. Good to see you. Peter, Ella, who is watching from Poland, and Yudi, who says, I love the picture of Stanley. I don't have my painting tools right now. Otherwise, I would paint him. He looks like he saw a ghost. It's the picture of Stan in the basket. And good to see you, Andy. Hope your health is better. And good to see you, Jens, Sarah, and Victoria, and everyone else who hasn't checked in but is watching. Welcome, everyone. And Bhante Suddhāso, thank you for sharing the Dhamma once again. So Bhante will be talking about deep listening this afternoon in the context of strong emotions, which is the topic of the read. And without further ado, I'll pass it on to him. And good to see you, Adriana, Jen, and Debbie.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So, as Ayasoma mentioned, I'm supposed to talk about deep listening in the context of strong emotions, which since I've spent several years now in close contact with an Italian, I have a lot of experience, both with having to listen a lot and also with having to deal with other people's strong emotions. So many of us might have similar experiences that we can relate to. So basically, all jokes aside, though it's not a joke, so all jokes aside, the question is, what do we mean when we talk about deep listening in a Buddhist context? And first off, I should just initially start with my copyright infringement notice. So I stole this term from Thich Nhat Hanh. He's, as far as I know, he's the one who first started using the term deep listening within the context of Buddhism. I might be wrong. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But the principles of it are about developing a set of techniques and tactics for really coming to a deep understanding of the person that you're listening to. So one of the ongoing problems which tends to come up in any kind of conversation or relationship or interaction between people is the tendency to not really listen to the other person. We tend to be so fixated on our own opinions, our own ideas, our own viewpoints, our own perspectives, our own emotions, our own thoughts, our own experience, that we don't really pay attention very much to what the other person is saying. There's kind of an ongoing joke in pop culture that in and I don't remember the most common phrasing of this, but the general idea of it is like, what is listening? That's when you're waiting for your turn to speak. So this is the polar opposite of deep listening. And there's actually a really great skit from the Chappelle Show, which I liked 15 years ago before I became a monk. I was a fan of the Chappelle Show. There's an episode of the Chappelle Show which plays this out very succinctly, where it's a skit where it shows what's going on in people's minds while they're listening. And so like one person talks and the other person it shows a little thought bubble and they're thinking about cars and pizza and movies and then changes turns and that person starts talking. The other person is thinking about flowers and unicorns and butterflies and then it switches and the first person's talking and the other one's thinking about random things. So again, this basic idea that we're not really listening. We're just waiting for our turn to speak. And that's a fairly gross form of non-deep listening, or rather in this case, just non-listening. But another form of this, which comes up more commonly, is that we do listen to some extent to what the other person is saying, but we're filtering it through our own opinions. So the other person is saying, well, I'm feeling very upset right now. And inside we're thinking, this idiot thinks that they have a right to be upset at me because they don't understand that I'm right. So we're rephrasing or rewriting their experience to fit in to what we already believe is going on. So once again, we're not really listening to what they're going through. We're just using their input as a way of confirming our pre-existing opinions and ideas. So this also is not quite deep listening. It's slightly better than just spacing out and fantasizing until it's our turn to speak. But it's still not quite touching it because we're still not really trying to connect with the other person's experience. So we're listening in kind of a half-hearted way, or listening um, from our own perspective. So constantly interpreting what the other person is saying through our own perspective. So always filtering it and adjusting it to match our pre-existing opinions. So once again, this is not deep listening. And I would say this is probably the most common way that people listen to each other. Uh, we listen to each other based on the assumption that what the other person is saying is probably wrong, and that therefore we have to rewrite it in our own mind to fit the truth. And by the truth, we mean our own opinions. By the truth, we mean our own perspectives, our own belief system, our own pre-existing judgments about what's really going on, or about what's important, about what matters. And very often that's based upon our prevailing belief that we're right. Because, of course, we're always right. It's never the other person that's right, it's always us. So, once again, this is not deep listening. So, the practice of deep listening is when the other person is speaking, make a genuine effort to understand their experience. So, completely setting aside your own mind, your own thoughts, your own opinions, your own emotions, your own experiences, set all of that aside and just devote all of your attention to really fully understanding what the other person is going through, what the other person is experiencing. And this can be extraordinarily difficult. Because if there's one thing we love more than everything else in the world, it's ourselves. And if there's one perspective that we love more than everybody else's, it's our own perspective. And if there's one set of experiences that we trust and value more than everything else in the world, it's our own experiences. So it's remarkably difficult to be willing to set that aside, even just for a few seconds, and really listen to another person, to really make a sincere effort to understand what they're going through. But that's exactly what deep listening is about. It's about, for a short period of time, setting aside all of our own perspectives and ideas and emotions and opinions and so on, and just making a genuine effort to really feel what the other person is feeling, to see the world through their eyes for a little while. To really come to a deep understanding of what they're going through, what it feels like for them. And this is incredibly transformative because very often the source of contention between people is coming out of misunderstanding. Uh, we argue with each other, we fight with each other, we disagree with each other because ultimately we don't really understand each other. And the reason why we don't really understand each other is because we're not trying to understand each other. We're just trying to reinforce our own opinion about the world. We're just trying to project our opinion onto the other people in our lives. And for the most part, that's what the other people in our lives are trying to do as well. They're just projecting their opinions onto us. So this creates this mismatch, this discord, this constant disconnect, dissonance. And sometimes that can explode quite disastrously. So these days, there's been a spike in divorce filings because, as it turns out, a lot of people are discovering that when they spend all of their time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, living with their spouse, that they actually don't really particularly like their spouse after all. And so divorce filings have gone through the roof over the last 2 or 3 weeks. Of course, this is America where people get divorced all the time anyway. So doesn't come as any big surprise. But what does this indicate? What it indicates is that there was a problem all along. It's just that now they can no longer avoid it and covering it up. They can no longer get away from it by spending time apart. Now that people are actually spending most of their time in each other's presence, they're starting to realize that there's been a disconnect all along, and that this disconnect is a really big problem, and that they don't have the tools to work with it. They don't have the resources to get through it. So, deep listening is a way that we can start to address this, a way that we can start to work through it. And what it starts from is the genuine interest to want to understand the other person. If you don't have that basic prerequisite, then deep listening is going to be an utter failure. In fact, you probably won't even try. So you have to start with the genuine willingness to understand the other person. And from a Buddhist standpoint, this is something that we should already have. Because one of the prerequisites for attaining awakening is to understand the nature of samsara, to understand the nature of dukkha, and also to understand that everything is ultimately anatta, it's ultimately not self, it's ultimately impersonal. So to recognize that the set of experiences that I am currently experiencing are not my true self, they're not who I really am. It's just a temporary experience that I'm having. Therefore, there should be no problem with setting it aside for a few seconds or a few minutes in order to listen to somebody else's experience. And also the experiences that the other person is going through. We ourselves could plausibly have exactly the same experience that they're having. In fact, at some point over the course of countless lifetimes, we have. We have had exactly the same experience that the other person is having. And we might have the same experience at some point in the future. So, what they're going through is not some bizarre alien experience caused by cognitive dysfunction, but rather it's a perfectly reasonable, understandable experience that, if we make an effort to understand it, will deepen our insight into the nature of human experience. It will deepen our insight into the nature of conscious experience. It will deepen our insight into the nature of dukkha, to the nature of the Four Noble Truths. Um, and so, deep listening, again, the basic principle while the other person is talking, listen, devote all your mind to listening, not judging. So again, often when we're listening, we're judging. So person A is thinking blah, 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 blah. And person B is thinking, that's wrong, that part's okay, that part's all right, that part's a little bit off, that part's wrong. That's not deep listening, that's deep judging. Actually, more often it's shallow judging. So again, total miss. But instead, while the other person is listening and while the other person is speaking and we're listening, we're not judging at all. Not judging like, oh, she overreacted to this, or I don't know why she thinks she should be angry about this, or it's so silly that this makes her sad. None of that. We're just like, oh, so she's feeling anger. Oh, okay. Well, what does that feel like? Okay. I see. Okay, and then sadness was happening. Okay. That's how it was. All right, that's how it felt for her. That's what that's what her experience was. That's all right. So suspending judgment, at least for the time being. Realistically, we're going to resume judging in a little while anyway. Um, so we'll handle the judgment part later. But suspend judgment, at least for the time of listening. So just listening without any judgment and listening without rewriting their experience. So really trying to see their experience from their own perspective. So not trying to see it in terms of our experiences or our perspectives, but really trying to see it from the other person's side. So one tool which can be helpful for this is as the other person is speaking, repeat their words inside your own mind. This is a very simple technique which can be remarkably effective at helping us step outside of our own perspective and really start to inhabit the other person's perspective for a little while. It's also very effective for making sure that we're actually paying attention. Because another problem which arises, and this is similar to the problems we often have with paying attention during meditation. Maybe we start off listening carefully for the first 2 or 3 seconds, and then we start slipping off into random thinking or distraction or daydreaming, and then we come back a few seconds later and we're like, oh, yeah, I hear you, I hear you. Uh-huh. And then we slip off and we're like, oh, butterflies. Oh, yes, I'm listening. Keep going. Okay. Oh, yeah. I'm here for you. Uh, uh. So just like what we do in meditation, where we're like, all right, mindfulness of breathing in. Butterflies. Breathing out. I'm so good at meditating. Pizza. Breathing in, breathing out. So we basically do exactly the same thing with listening. So we have to constantly put ourselves back on the meditation object. So similarly with deep listening, we have to constantly put ourselves back in listening. Whenever we catch ourselves wandering off into useless thinking, which is going to be about 99% of the time, just as during meditation practice, then we immediately drop that wandering thought and immediately put our attention back on listening. Another element of deep listening, once again, is to accept the other person's experience at face value. Again, not arguing with it in our minds, not saying it's exaggerated or overblown or over the top or inaccurate or distorted, just accepting it at face value. It's like, this is what the person is presenting as their experience. Well, that's what it is. Again, this doesn't necessarily mean that we agree with them, but for the course of listening, we're not trying to analyze or dissect or argue with the other person's experience. We're just trying to feel it. We're trying to understand it. And even exaggeration. So once again, spending several years with an Italian, I've come to accept that exaggeration can be a tool of communication. It can be a way of expressing that one has a very strong emotional charge around something. So sometimes exaggeration, it's not meant to be taken literally, but rather it's meant to communicate that somebody feels very strongly about what's going on. Or sometimes it's just used as hyperbole, as a way of drawing particular attention to a point that the person is trying to make. And actually, we do this a million times a day. We're constantly exaggerating, like saying that we do it a million times a day. Realistically, we don't do anything a million times a day, except possibly breathing, and even that I'd have to do the math. I'm not convinced of that one either. Help me out. You're good at math. Do we breathe a million times a day? Okay, so the scientist in the room says she doesn't think so. So we're probably not breathing. Probably not doing anything a million times a day except spacing out and thinking random thoughts. So I don't think we even breathe that much. Maybe we do. I'm not going to do the math. Probably somebody is doing the math and typing it in the live chat as we speak. Because that means you're not listening deeply to the Dhamma talk. You're just spacing out and playing with the calculator on your phone or your computer or both. at the same time, possibly.
Kevin says 23,000 breaths.
23,000 breaths per day. See, not even close to 1,000,000. But we probably do think random thoughts a
Then he
million
says,
times a day.
oops, you got me, Bhante.
Busted. And so one way that deep listening works most effectively, by the way, is to take turns. Because remember, this is about coming to a deeper understanding of each other. It's not person A must understand person B, because that's presupposing that person B is the one who needs to be understood and person A's opinion is not so important either. But rather, it has to be a two-way street. So one of the ways is to formalize this. So person A gets to speak about their experience for however long, and person B listens. It really tries to understand without doing anything other than trying to understand. And then you take turns. Person B speaks for as long as they need to speak, and person A really tries to understand. Really tries to feel what person B is going through. An extra tool which can be incredibly helpful is to take notes. While the other person is talking, take notes. And this also is really useful for a number of reasons. One, it helps to make sure that we're actually paying attention. And two, one of the obstacles that often comes up in deep listening is while the other person is talking, we often have a strong impulse to respond. And sometimes, especially if your short-term memory is not the greatest, sometimes the impulse to respond overpowers the willpower to keep listening. It's like, well, if I don't address what they're saying right now, then I'll forget. So write it down so that you don't forget. You write it down and you keep listening. Suspend judgment, write it down, keep listening. And then when it's your turn to speak, then you might speak about some of the things that you wrote down, or you might not. It might not be relevant at that point. But again, the critical element here is that both people are making the sincere commitment to listen to and understand each other, to set aside their pre-existing judgments and opinions, and just really make an effort to come to a deep, visceral feeling of what the other person has been going through, what they're experiencing. And coming to the subject of emotions, dealing with strong emotions. Again, this is incredibly important within that context as well. And one of the reasons for this is because when we are experiencing strong emotions, it's often very difficult for us to communicate clearly. And also, when we're experiencing strong emotions, it's very difficult for us to listen effectively. So if you have two people who are both in the grip of strong emotions of one sort or another, trying to have any sort of communication or conversation or interaction, then there's a very good chance that there's going to be a lot of miscommunication and misunderstanding. And next thing you know, people are calling the divorce lawyer. In my case, I'm not married, so that means I won't be calling divorce lawyers anytime soon. But it can poison all of our friendships, all of our relationships, the interactions that we have with other people. So we really need to be careful. So when there are strong emotions present, then the deep listening format gives us the opportunity to really try to communicate clearly what we're going through. And also recognizing that sometimes our communication, as we're speaking and the other person listens, sometimes our communication is just going to be a wild, chaotic jumble. Sometimes it's called emotional diarrhea. It's just all this gunk just spewing out of our mouths. And that's okay. It's okay. Because that's just what it feels like, and that's just how it comes out sometimes. And the person who's listening, their job is not to try to teach you grammar lessons on how to properly phrase your sentences or whatever. It's just to listen, to be present for your emotional diarrhea, and to just try to feel what you're going through, feel what's behind the words, instead of getting caught up on the specific words being used. Try to feel what's behind it. And then similarly, while listening, once again, as I mentioned earlier, while listening, we try to set aside our own emotional filters and just really be present for what the other person is saying. So, and this can be a way of coming to a deeper understanding of just what our emotional states are. So, as we're speaking and as we're listening, then we can come to a deeper understanding of just what is this, what are the emotional currents that are flowing through each other's minds? How is that shaping our experiences? How is that affecting the way that we see each other, the way that we relate to each other? How is that affecting the way that we interpret each other's words and actions? So, I don't really have a whole lot else to say on this subject. Uh, and one thing I will say, though, is that ultimately this is a relational tool. It's something that we use in relating to other people. It's not something that you do during sitting meditation. Although there is a lot of overlap with the skill sets that one develops through meditation. There's a lot of overlap in deep listening exercises as one develops in meditation practice. But ultimately, deep listening is something that is developed in relationship. It's developed in communication and interaction with others. And the optimal form is when both people make a commitment to understanding each other and sitting down and taking turns listening to each other. That's the optimal format. But often that's not the case. Often you'll just be sitting there, totally peaceful, thinking everything is fine. And then the other person starts ranting at you, and you're just like, whoa, where did that come from? Uh, well, sometimes all you can do then is just practice deep listening. Listen carefully. Okay, so maybe it wasn't a formal deep listening appointment that was set up for 2:30 p.m. on Friday the 13th, but rather it's a spontaneous ranting session. And well, that's what it is. Listen deeply, listen carefully, try to understand. And let them say whatever they have to say without judgment, without expectation, patiently, kindly, gently, tolerantly, really trying to feel what they're going through. And then when the time seems right, then you might gently ask, would you like to hear what I'm going through? Would you like to listen to my experience so that we can better understand each other? So that we can come towards a clearer, more peaceful relationship between each other, a clearer, more peaceful connection. So it's like, I hear you, I feel you, I understand what you're going through. And if you're interested, maybe you'd like to hear my experience as well. Maybe you'd like to hear what's been going on for me as well. And maybe through this mutual listening, we can come to a better understanding. And applying it throughout the day. So actually, as a general rule, whenever somebody else is talking to you, it's good just to listen. So if we're sitting there planning what we're going to say in response, then we're not really present for what the person is saying. And if we do wind up speaking based on our plan, then it's going to be stale. Our statements are going to be out of place. They're going to be not quite relevant, not quite useful. But if we stay completely present with what the other person is saying as they're speaking, then when it is our turn to speak, then we'll actually be able to say what's timely, what's relevant. Another critical element that I should mention with the practice of deep listening is to bring up the mind of great compassion, to genuinely wish for all beings involved to be happy, to be free of suffering, generally wishing for all beings involved to be peaceful, genuinely wishing for them to attain wisdom and understanding. So bringing up that gentle, compassionate mind as one is listening and as one is speaking. And really trying to put self aside, not taking it personally. As the other person speaks, don't take it personally because it's not personal, it's just their experience. And as you speak, don't take your own experience personally either because it's just another experience, it's just another story. Feels awfully real, but it's still just a story. Don't take it personally. And be willing to let go of it when the time for letting go comes. I think that's all I have to say for the moment. So I'd like to go ahead and open up for questions and discussion. If there's any discussion to be had, I think I'll stop at this point.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you so much, Bhante, for sharing your wisdom as usual. So we have a few amused comments from Yudi and Adriana, especially on the fact that you had to deal with an Italian, and they're like, well, at least it's an Italian and not a Hispanic.
Though I've been told they're not so different from each other.
Yeah, we're kind of like same difference. And good to see you, Jen and Marielle and Tran and Suzanne. Hello again. Jessica, good to see you. Melinda, Jens, snow rider skiing. I don't know who's that. Adriana says, 3 empty sadhus. Thank you, Bhante. That was beautiful. And Yuri says, that talk was intense. Thank you, Bhante. Jen says, big up the Italians. Fire, fire. All right, so let me scroll to the top. So if you have any questions, feel free to put it in the live chat and we'll ask Bhante. So Suzanne, actually, yeah, Suzanne says, very often what I hear is not what's being said. I react emotionally to what I think is happening and then have quite a job getting to reality. I won't say back to reality, lol. I'm not sure I've ever been there.
Bonus points for honesty.
And Trisha asks, how to balance deep listening while also setting healthy boundaries? There are people who are suffering so much that they could talk for hours about their misery.
Yeah, so that's challenging. So first off, I should also say on the subject of deep listening, uh, you have to start with the genuine belief that the other person is interested in coming to a better mutual understanding. Uh, so otherwise, you're wasting your time and you're wasting their time. If So, deep listening only really works if there is an interest in understanding each other. Otherwise, it's not going to go anywhere. Um, Maybe one person will get a slightly better understanding of the other, but if there's not that mutual willingness to come to a better understanding, then it's not going to bring deep results. That said, sometimes the conversation might start off where one person is in a very self-centered frame of mind and they just want to vent and spew their opinions and perspectives, which they of course are deeply committed are the right ones, definitely completely correct and accurate, which therefore means the other person must be wrong. That's how it starts sometimes. But as the process unfolds, then that person might start softening up and starting to accept that there actually is more than one way to experience a situation, more than one way to feel, more than one way to see. They might start to realize that their experience is just their experience and that other people have different experiences. So sometimes that's how it starts. It starts off where it seems like one person is very rigid and set in their perspective, but as time goes by and the process unfolds, they start to soften up a bit. So it's optimally try to give people the benefit of the doubt unless you have um, really overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Really try to give people the benefit of the doubt. But as far as the issue of one person talking for hours and hours and hours, well, that's not taking turns, is it? That's one person talking for hours. So In those cases, you might consider having a time limit. Like each person gets to speak for 5 minutes, or more than 5 minutes might be pushing it, maybe 10 minutes tops. And then you take turns. So you actually have a timer to make sure that one person doesn't dominate the stage, so to speak. Um, Again, I don't recommend that as a general strategy, but rather as something specifically for dealing with the kind of person who will just ramble on and on and on for a couple hours without ever pausing to listen to the other person. Yeah, that's something you might try.
Thank you, Bante. And Jen says, I found often when I would try and actively listen to a person, it would open the communication, and the other person would also
Mm,
naturally begin to listen as well.
mm. Yeah.
And Carolina says, hello, thank you for the talk. Funny how I'm trying to avoid listening at all in a quarantined home. Ha 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 ha. Good to see you, Carolina, by the way. Carolina actually is the awesome fun fact for all the other people. Carolina is our awesome friend who we were talking about the other day, who was sewing masks for healthcare workers and people in New York. Sadhu, 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 Carolina. Rejoice in your own goodness.
This is beekeeper Carolina.
Yes.
Yes, she also keeps small beehives, which is another sadhu, sadhu, sadhu worthy effort.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. She's just an awesome being. We love you. And Sally says, may I ask, Bante mentioned which sutta Buddha mentioned something about deep listening?
So there's actually quite a lot of discourses. So the Buddha doesn't directly use the phrase deep listening anywhere that I'm aware of, but there's a lot of suttas where he talks about ways of relating to each other in wholesome, effective ways. So if you send an email, I can give you a list of sutta references of places where the Buddha talks about it. A few places which are quite helpful, just as like sort of primers, which just pop immediately into my mind. One is the Arna Vibhanga Sutta, Sutta on the analysis of non-conflict, which actually we should go over in Sutta study one of these days. That's a really important sutta. The Anumana Sutta is also quite helpful. The Chodaka Sutta from the Anguttara Nikaya. There's actually quite a few. Those are just three that pop into my mind immediately that touch to some extent on these topics. Yeah, send me an email and I can give you a list. Another great resource for this, by the way, is Bhikkhu Bodhi's anthology. It's called something like Social and Communal Harmony. Is that right?
I believe so. The teachings on social and communal harm, the teachings of the Buddha on social and communal harmony, something like that.
Something like that. So that's a place where the Buddha compiled a lot of suttas from all over the Pali Canon, which relate to communal harmony and how to interact with other people in a wholesome way. So there's a lot of material in there which is directly relevant one way or another. So I recommend reading that book anyway, just because it's really interesting, an interesting anthology of suttas. But it also contains a few that are directly related to this practice of listening to each other. Okay.
Great, thank you. And Jens makes the comment, what has helped me listen as well is moving away from a mind of wanting to be right to wanting to understand.
Yes, that's actually critical. We actually have to start with the willingness to admit that we might not be right. Or at the very least, to admit that we are right only from our own perspective. So, of course, from my eyes, everything is right. And from other people's eyes, they're right. But when we come and listen to each other, then we can recognize that we just look like we're right from our own eyes. Okay?
And then there's lots of thumbs up for Carolina. Much respect. You're awesome. And then Peter says, I have challenges listening intensely to another when they are expressing non Dhammic thoughts, such as anger, hatred that isn't towards me. I'm concerned about improperly seeding my mind. thoughts? Um,
So listening to another person does not mean that you have to take on their perspectives. It just means that you're trying to really understand their perspectives. So, an example of this was 2 or 3 years ago. At the end of one of our retreats, we were sitting around having tea, as we often do. We were sitting around having tea with a few of the people from the retreat who were still at the center, who hadn't yet left to go back home. And one of them started talking about his racist viewpoints. So even though I'm not racist and the other people in the room were not racist, and none of us were remotely interested in becoming racist, we listened to him. And then, once we understood his perspective, then we pointed out that what he was saying was against the Buddha's words, that what he was saying was contradicting the Dhamma, that what he was saying was not in line with the Buddha's teachings. So listening and trying to understand his viewpoint did not turn the rest of us into racists. It just meant that we understood his perspective so that we were most able to put him back on the track of Dhamma. Unfortunately, we failed and he wound up getting annoyed and leaving, and we haven't seen him since. But that's the way things go sometimes. But the point is that listening carefully to another person and really trying to understand their perspective does not necessarily mean that you are going to take on their unwholesome patterns. That's not the case. Especially if you're already well grounded in Dhamma, then you will know what is Dhamma and you will know what is not Dhamma. And that means that you will not take on, well, hopefully, you won't willingly take on a non-Dhamma course of thought, non-Dhamma course of action. But by understanding the other person's experience, then you can start to see how to gently guide them towards the Dhamma. But first you have to understand where they are. So it's kind of like if somebody is lost and they need directions, well, before you can give them directions, you have to understand where they are. So this isn't the most useful analogy anymore these days, because these days everybody has smartphones. But in the old days, when I was a kid, then people would sometimes get what was called lost. So this was something that happened because they didn't have smartphones. So they needed directions. So it'd be like, well, I'm trying to get to the park. Which way do I go to get to the park? Well, that depends. If you're west of the park, then you need to go east. But if you're east of the park, you need to go west. So the first question to ask is, well, where are you? Once I know where you are, then I can give you directions to help you go in the right direction. Well, it's the same. When somebody is off the track of the Dhamma, first we have to understand where they are. Then we can be of the most benefit to them. So yeah, somebody might be expressing all kinds of anti-Dhamma viewpoints and opinions and feelings and so on. Listen to them. Really try to understand where they are, where they're coming from. What's the source and basis of all of those non-Dhamma perspectives? What's bringing up those unwholesome attitudes in their mind? And see if you can address the source of the unwholesomeness when you have the opportunity, which is not while you're listening, by the way. While you're listening, you're just listening. This is really important. While you're listening, you're just listening. You're just trying to understand where they are and what they're going through. That's it. Save the strategizing for later. When you're listening, you're just listening. Okay?
Thank you. And I think because he says later, some of my defilements were picked up or strengthened by hearing things over and over when younger, even though at the time I disagreed with those views. So perhaps also I think there is the what he's referring to is also that if you are surrounded by angry people, so angry thoughts, even though you're currently not experiencing the defilement of anger, you tend to pick it up. Aside from the views that the person is espousing,
Mm.
um, also their kind of emotional state.
Yeah, you have to make your mind like the open sky, where anything will just float right through it without sticking. Yeah. Okay. Next
Ah,
question.
I really like that simile. Thank you, Bhante. Mehmet asks, is there a format for how monks and nuns can criticize each other constructively? Also, are lay people allowed to criticize monastics?
Is there a monastic you want to criticize? So the Buddha gave a lot of advice on how to properly give and receive criticism. In fact, some of the Buddha's words on that we chant almost every morning here because they're so practical and useful. So the Buddha had a lot to say. Uh, Actually, two of the suttas I referenced earlier, the Anumana Sutta and the Chodaka Sutta, both give a lot of very practical advice on how to give and receive criticism effectively and in line with Dhamma. So that's where I'd recommend looking. We'll find a lot in those suttas. But one thing that we really need to watch for is our own state of mind. So this is covered particularly in the Chodaka Sutta. In the Chodaka Sutta, the Buddha talks about the state of mind that one needs to have before giving any sort of criticism. So it's critical that one be filled with loving kindness. It's critical that one speak gently. It's critical that one be speaking beneficially. Uh, and it's critical that one be speaking the truth. And it's critical that one speak at the right time. So these are 5 basic guidelines that we need to be firmly established in our own mind before we deliver any kind of criticism to another person. And the Buddha says more, and he also talks at much length about how to receive criticism effectively in a wholesome, supportive way. But we do really need to ask, why do I want to criticize someone? Is it for their benefit? Or is it just because I'm annoyed and I want to get it off my chest? Or is it just because I don't like them and I want to make them change? Why? Why do we want to criticize? What's going on within ourselves? And when we examine ourselves in this way, often we wind up dropping our intent to criticize because we realize it's based in something unwholesome. It's not based in something beneficial. It's just based on our own defilements, our own self-centeredness, our own irritation. Not so useful. Uh, as to whether lay people can criticize monastics, well, they do anyway. But the truth is that anybody can offer constructive feedback to anyone else. So if a layperson has something which they want to say to a monastic, which they genuinely believe will be to that monastic's benefit, and which they genuinely believe is true, and they genuinely believe it's the right time to say it, and they do their best to say it gently and with a mind of love and kindness, then yeah, go ahead. Be careful, but go ahead. Um, and also within monastics, there's not a limit of seniority. So even the most junior monastic can offer criticism to the most senior monastic, as long as they pass that 5-point checklist. Then it's okay. Um, you can't always guarantee that your criticism is going to be received well. That applies for everyone. I'm not just talking about monastics here. You can't always guarantee that your criticism will be received well. But as long as you make sure that you're meeting those 5 requirements first, then the odds of it going over well are much higher. The odds of it having a positive effect are much higher. Okay.
Thank you. And Jen says, I also heard you the other day and canceled all gifts slash dana of towels.
That's good. Though, again, ask. They might actually need towels. I'm actually worried sometimes when I say these things that I'm going to create a towel shortage in the monasteries. But then I remember that that will never happen.
Maybe there was a towel shortage at a certain time, and that's how the trend happened to begin with. Anyway, Andy says, I have much room to grow in this area. And Peter says, thank you for the detailed answer. I generally am surrounded with good Dhamma, and the open sky seemingly can help in other times. Thank you. And Sally says, if we put our own ideas aside and listen to others, non Dhamma speak totally, how could we not be impacted by others using the empty sky method? It's kind of scary to lose own Dhamma perspective.
Well, because you're just doing it for a period of time. It's just for a few seconds. It's like for a few seconds, I'm just going to listen and I'm just going to try to understand, and that's it. Then afterwards, then you can reflect and consider. It's like, okay, well, that person said that she got furious because I took the last piece of pizza. Okay, well, I acknowledge that's her experience, but I also acknowledge that she's just manifesting greed, hatred, and delusion. So I need to acknowledge that that's what she went through, and I need to address the impact of that. But that doesn't mean, excuse me, that doesn't mean pretending that it's okay. We still acknowledge that it's unwholesome conduct arising from unwholesome mind states. But you do that after the time of listening. Yeah, I would look at this hesitance or this fear to listen to other people, because we find all kinds of ways to justify. We find all kinds of ways to justify not listening to others, not paying attention to others, not trying to understand others. So trying to understand somebody else doesn't mean that we justify their unwholesomeness. It doesn't mean that we pretend what they're doing is okay. It just means that we're trying to understand what they're going through. And often that's the best way to help someone, is first you understand what they're going through. Then you can see how to help them more clearly. There's a really lovely scene from, well, it's from a movie which I saw about 15, 20 years ago. And at one point, the main character in this movie decides to go in and see a doctor. So he makes an appointment. And he walks through the door of the doctor's office, and before the patient says a single word, the doctor says, "There's absolutely nothing wrong with you." And the patient's like, "Wait, what?" And the doctor says, "I'm kidding. How would I know? Have a seat." But the point is, it starts off like, how could the doctor possibly know what was right or what was wrong when the patient hadn't even had a chance to speak? So often that's actually how we react to other people. We're automatically like, I know the solution to all of your problems. And the person's like, well, but you don't even know what my problems are. How could you possibly have the solutions when you have no clue what I'm going through? So we have to be willing first to listen to what someone's going through before we're capable of offering them anything helpful. Okay?
Wonderful. All right. Thank you, Bhante. I think that was the last question for now. We will have at 7:30 a Q&A session, monk chat with Bhante Suddhāso and myself. So if you have any other questions or unrelated questions, or you just want to chat with us, you can join in at 7:30 p.m. And we will be chanting like yesterday the Ratana Sutta first, and then we will be answering all the questions that appear. And are we live streaming the meditation? Bhante says no. They see you.
I know, I know.
Would it be helpful for you for us to live stream the meditation this afternoon or not? Let's see. Let's ask.
Say no, not helpful. You can meditate on your own, no problems.
Mehmet says, thank you. Really appreciate this topic since I believe this is a huge problem. It's
Mm.
true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Welcome to the club. We're all trying to figure things out. Well, it doesn't seem like people. Okay, Bobby says no. He
Okay.
really wants to get Bhante to like him.
I like you already, don't worry.
Maya says yes. Oh, Bobby says let's give Bhante a break. Come
Okay,
on.
so it looks like that's a no.
Adriana says I'm impartial. And Sally says we respect Bhante and Aya's preference.
Okay, I think that's a no.
Oh, Peter says I was conditioned by Bhante. No. This is kind of fun. So let's see if there's any other people that want for the live stream to happen besides Marielle, or if she's outnumbered by the no's conditioned by Bhante.
Okay, so I think that's decided. So please continue practicing on your own. So walking meditation and sitting meditation, so alternating between the two until 5 o'clock. So that's 2.5 hours. So
sorry, Andy said after using deep listening, Bhante clearly said no. Chan said, I think I'm a good listener and a decent understander, but a very bad reactor. Okay, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu for doing actually deep listening to Bhante. So I guess we will skip the live stream for the afternoon, but we will be doing it during the week-long retreat. I think that would be nice to do, which will happen in a couple of weeks. Not soon. Why are you giving me that look? That's scary. Now I'm doing deep seeing.
Anyway, so please continue sitting and walking until 5 o'clock. So that's 2.5 hours. So you might do one period sitting, walking, then sitting, walking, then sitting, taking you up to 5. So you can do the math on how long to have each period be. Again, set timers for yourself. Don't just do it freestyle. Unless you're very experienced and you trust yourself very well, which means probably not a good idea. So again, timers are really, really good. Don't just wing it. Then at 5 o'clock, you can take a break. Then do another period of meditation from 6 to 7, and then check in again at 7:30. Okay? So we'll see you then.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.